Chapter 1. Harriet Tubman, 1820 to 1913. The slave who escaped and helped hundreds of other slaves to escape. I escaped from slavery in the South of the USA. I then helped hundreds of other slaves to escape to the north of the USA and Canada. I also freed hundreds of slaves who wanted to fight in the Civil War. My parents were slaves for the Brodess family in Maryland, USA. I was the fifth of 9 children. At the age of 6, I started work as a nursemaid for another family. After that, I had to work in the woods and fields. Our owners did not think of us as people. For them, we were like animals or machines. If we did something wrong, they hit us or punished us in horrible ways. In 1831, at the age of 11, I started to do the same work as the adult slaves. Every day we had to work for many hours in the fields. Around this time I received an injury, which I never forgot. I refused to stop a slave who was escaping. The slave's owner threw a metal weight at the slave, but it hit me on the head. It hurt a lot, and this injury gave me headaches for the rest of my life. In 1849, I was brave and tried to escape. I was married by then, but my marriage was very unhappy, and I hated the thought of another year of slavery. 2 of my brothers agreed to come with me. We wanted to reach the north of the USA, where slavery was illegal. I could live there as a free woman. We made good progress towards the north, but then we heard some bad news. Our owner was offering $300 to anyone who caught us. My brothers became frightened, and we decided to return to Maryland. We were punished when we returned, but I still wanted to escape.
A short time later, I escaped again. This time I went alone. I traveled at night along quiet roads and paths. Some kind people helped me on the way. They gave me food and a place to sleep. Finally, I arrived in the city of Philadelphia in the north. The journey was long and difficult, but it felt wonderful to be free at last. In Philadelphia, I got a job and began to earn money. I missed my parents and my brothers and sisters. I was free and I wanted my family to be free, too. Maybe I could help them to escape. In 1850, I received some bad news. My niece and her daughters were in danger. Their owner wanted to sell them and they didn't want to go to different families. I decided to return to Maryland to free them. I had to help them to escape. We traveled at night and used the stars to find our way to the north. After helping my niece and her daughters, I helped many other slaves to escape. I offered to help my husband, John Tubman, too, but he didn't want to leave the South. He didn't want to be with me anymore, so our marriage ended. Soon, a new law made things a lot more difficult for me. It became illegal to help a slave to escape in the USA. I had to find a new route to Canada, where slavery was illegal. In 1857, I went on a very special journey to help my parents. They weren't slaves anymore, but their life in the South was very difficult. They were very happy to see me again and wanted to go with me to Canada. Our journey was very slow and difficult because my parents were old. We had a big celebration when we finally arrived in Ontario, Canada. In 1861, the American Civil War started. The Confederates from the South wanted slavery to continue. The Unionists from the North wanted slavery to become illegal. I joined the Union Army, which fought for the North. An Army captain, James Montgomery, heard about me. He discovered that I helped slaves to escape before the war. And he wanted my help. He wanted slaves to fight for freedom in the Union Army. I took a team of spies to the South and found slaves who wanted to join us. It was dangerous work, but we were very successful. On one trip, 700 slaves agreed to escape and they became soldiers. On the 9th of April 1865, the war ended. What could I do with my life now? I decided to fight for equal rights for black people and for women. I spoke at public meetings and I tried to help black people who were poor and old. In 1896, I bought some land and, in 1903, I gave the land to my church. I wanted the church to start a home for black people who were poor and elderly. In 1908, the home opened for the first time. As I looked back at my life, I was very proud. I was happy that I helped so many people to find freedom. The Life of Harriet Tubman. C.Point 1820 Araminta Harriet Course was born in Maryland, USA. Her parents were slaves for the Brodess family. 1826 She started to work as a nursemaid when she was 6 years old. 1831 When she was 11 years old, she started to do the same work as adult slaves. She was hit by a metal weight. The head injury gave her pain for the rest of her life. 1844 She married John Tubman, a free man. 1849 She escaped for the first time with 2 of her brothers. $300 was offered to anyone who caught them. They decided to return to their owner. A short time later, Harriet escaped again and reached Philadelphia in the north of the USA. 1850 She helped her niece and many other slaves to escape to Philadelphia. It became illegal to help a slave to escape in the USA. Harriet found a new route to Canada. 1857 She helped her parents to escape to Ontario, Canada. 1860 She went on her last journey to help slaves to escape from the South. 1861 Harriet joined the Union Army in the Civil War. 1863 She worked for Colonel James Montgomery, the captain in the Union Army. She found slaves who wanted to join the Union Army. 1865 She wrote a book Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman with Sarah H. Bradford. 1869 She married Nelson Davis, who was a soldier in the Civil War. 1899 She started to receive money for her work during the war. 1903 She bought some land to build a home for black people who were poor and old. 1908 The Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged opened for the first time. 1913 Harriet died when she was 93 years old. She spent her final years in the home that she helped to build. Chapter TWO Emmeline Pankhurst 1858 to 1928. The woman who wanted women to be able to vote. I campaigned all my life for equal rights for women. I started a political group which fought for the vote for women in Britain. After many years of protests, we finally won the right for British women to vote. When I was born in 1858, women in Britain didn't have the same rights as men. Most women couldn't go to school or university. They were only allowed to work in certain jobs. And they didn't have the right to vote. I grew up in Manchester in the north of England, and I saw many problems every day. Mothers had to bring up children in small, dirty houses. Disease was everywhere because of the terrible conditions. And most women only lived until they were around 50 years old. I knew from a young age that I wanted to improve women's lives. My parents believed in human rights. They believed that education was a right for women as well as men. In 1873, my parents sent me to school in Paris. They wanted me to get a wider view of the world. In Paris, I was disappointed to discover that women were still not equal with men after the French Revolution. Action was needed, and I returned to England to begin the fight. In Britain, the political situation was quite unusual. Our ruler was a woman, Queen Victoria. She was a powerful leader, but she wasn't interested in women's rights. Our politicians were all men, and they definitely weren't interested in political equality for women. In 1879, I was surprised to discover a man who was campaigning for women's rights. His name was Richard Pankhurst, and he was a lawyer. We shared many of the same beliefs and ideas. We got married and started a family. For almost 20 years, Richard and I fought for political rights for women. Then, sadly, my dear husband died. My daughters and I were very sad, but we decided to continue our campaign. The two oldest daughters, Christabel and Sylvia, became activists. In 1903, we started the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU. It was a group that fought for the right for women to vote. Christabel became one of our bravest leaders. Sylvia was an artist, and she designed our posters and signs. The WSPU organized many public meetings and protests. Sometimes the police arrested our members. Christabel was one of the first to go to prison. When our members were in prison, we protested. And when our members came out of prison, we celebrated in the streets. It was very important to get public attention. Unfortunately, the government didn't agree with our campaign. We had to take more powerful action. Some of our members began to break the law. They lit fires in buildings and broke windows. Our campaign was a war for these women. For me, it was always a fight for equal rights. Every time I was arrested, I told the judge, "We don't want to break laws, we want to make new laws." But the lawyers and politicians didn't want to listen. In 1910, Prime Minister Asquith, the government leader, stopped a new law that gave women the vote. We were shocked and angry. On Friday, the 18th of November, I led a group of women to meet the Prime Minister, but he refused to see us. We started to protest in the street, and 100 women were arrested. It was a terrible day. We called it Black Friday. In 1914, the First World War began, and we agreed to stop our campaign. Women were now needed as nurses in hospitals and to work in factories and on farms. In 1917, we started a new group with a new name, the Women's Party. In 1918, the First World War ended. The government realized that women were an important part of the victory in the war. At last, women were given the right to vote, but only women over 30 years old who owned a home could vote. Any man over 21 could vote. we still didn't have full equality. After the war, I went to live in the USA, Canada, and also Bermuda. In 1926, I returned to England. I wanted to become a politician, but my health wasn't good enough. In 1928, only 3 weeks before I died, a new law gave women the same right to vote as men. It took much longer than we hoped. But in the end our campaign was successful and at last we won political equality for women. The life of Emmeline Pankhurst 1858. Emmeline Goulden was born in Manchester, England. 1860s she became interested in women's rights as a child and went to political meetings. 1873 she was sent to a school in Paris which believed in equal education for boys and girls. 1879 she met and married Richard Pankhurst, a lawyer. He believed in votes for women. 1886 the family moved to London. They had meetings for political activists in their home. 1893 Richard and Emmeline returned to Manchester. 1898 Richard died, but Emmeline decided to continue the campaign to win the vote for women. 1903 Emmeline and her daughters, Christabel and Sylvia, started the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU, which fought for political equality for women. 1905 Christabel was arrested during a protest. 1908 Emmeline was arrested for the first time. She went to prison for 6 weeks. 1910 Prime Minister Asquith stopped a law that gave women the vote. The WSPU protested and 100 women were arrested. 1914 The First World War started. The WSPU stopped their campaign for the vote. 1916 Emmeline visited the USA, Canada, and Russia. She wanted women there to fight for the vote in their countries. 1917 Christabel and Emmeline started the Women's Party. 1918 The First World War ended. Women over 30 years old won the right to vote. After the war, Emmeline went to live in the USA, Canada, and Bermuda. 1926 she returned to England and wanted to become a politician. She became ill and could not continue with her plans. 1928 Emmeline died in London a few weeks after a new law gave equal voting rights to women. She was 69 years old.